Hello and welcome to Not Made in China, the podcast talking all things adoption and the beautiful madness that comes with it. I'm Xiao Sheen, your host, and today I'm joined by Cerrita Smith, a therapist with over 13 years of experience specialising in mental health and complex traumas, particularly with children who've been adopted. She also works as an organisational consultant and workshop facilitator, working in the media industry, education, public health, higher education and the corporate sector. Today, we're going to be discussing Cerrita's work with adoptees, and there's just so much to cover, so let's jump right on into it, and I hope you enjoy eavesdropping on our conversation. So Cerrita, thank you very much for joining me. It's really such a joy to have you on, and I'm delighted you want to have a chat.
That's okay, my pleasure.
Because when we first met, when we were first introduced, not only was there the adoption crossover, but there was also the music crossover. Because did you say you started studying therapy at Guildhall?
Yes, yeah, I studied music therapy at Guildhall School of Music and Drama, but I'd studied Western classical music before that in another university.
No, it's fantastic. And yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, I was raised in a very musical family and playing flute and piano was kind of my life up until I was about 18. So as soon as I saw you had that musical background, I just thought, yes, we have to talk. So to start off, I'd love to know what led you to your work with adoptees in the first place.
So I'll start off by telling you a bit about where I was before working with adoptees. I'd worked in adult mental health for a number of years, and then I started to work for a charity who specialise in supporting children and families who have been adopted. And when I was in the charity, I wasn't actually working in adoption, but I was working with other young people who had emotional behavioural needs or special educational needs in schools. And it was suggested basically that I moved across to adoption because of my experience, and that was the reason I ended up working in adoption. Yeah, so for me, as I said, I'd been working in adult mental health, and then I was working in a school with children who had additional needs and behavioural needs as well. And I think the place I was working in at the time, I think it was noticed that I had this experience of working with people who had particular complex presentations. And the charity that I was working with at the time, the adoptees who came into the charity and who were often coming for therapy tended to be people who had had really tricky early life experiences, the more complex end of things. And it was suggested that I might want to consider working in adoption. And I did a bit of research and learning, and also I, at the time, was running a mother and baby group for new adoptee children and their families. I just got really interested in the area and started off with one young person, and then I really loved the work and continued working in that area. And I think the thing that was so important for me in a way was being able to see the impact that you could have on supporting families to come together, whether it's supporting the families. So sometimes the work I would be doing would be to support the families to, I guess, become more secure within their relationship with each other. And it was trying to help each of them to get to know each other differently, and that was through therapy and also through the use of creativity as part of that. And then in other instances, the work was specifically focused on supporting the adoptees who referred to me to understand some of their life story, understand early experiences, have a space to express what they'd been through and what they'd experienced as well, or express their identity as it was now. It was really lovely when doing that work, particularly with younger people, because some people I'd worked with over a number of years, it was really lovely to see how that identity and their sense of self developed over the years that I was working with some of them, or for the ones who I wasn't working with long term. Some young people, I'd work with them when they were toddlers, and then they'd come back, when they were in their later childhood, and I could see, the benefits of the work, or see how they change, or just see the person that they've become now. And that was really nice and quite rewarding. But also, I think what I have really learned, and in some ways I feel as though I've really become a try at least to become a professional champion of proper safe working with adopted children and families, because it is an area that requires you to have great understanding of some of the nuances and the sensitivities related to people's life stories, and actually being quite careful and considerate in how we talk about that. So, for example, being quite considerate in terms of the language that we are using. And a lot of my work extends from, so I do work with the adoptee, but I also, the way I work is I'll work with the family around the child, but quite often I'll end up working with the school or with the other system outside of the family, because in that there may be sensitivities that are coming up in therapy where I'll just use the school, for example, but it could be another community institution or another community service or service that's interacting with the child and family's life. There might be ways in which, due to their own lack of awareness with some of the sensitivities and the additional, vulnerabilities or additional psychological needs and triggers that can come with for some people being adopted, they might not be aware that the language that they're using is quite activating for the young person. It's distressing for them, or subjects that are being discussed in the classroom may be very upsetting for young people, and a lot of that can be around the norms that we ascribe to family, and people not necessarily always being as sensitive to the reality that families look really different, and everyone's family is constructed in their own individualistic way. So I was just wanting to mention that, because that's been, I suppose that's what I'm talking about when I was thinking around the sensitivities and trying to champion this deeper understanding of the of what the reality of people's lives are, and that not just being some sort of strange norm that we've established in society that says all families look like this, and it's not the reality. So yeah, so that's how I got into the work, but also that's part of the reason why I have stayed and really love doing that work.
It really sounds incredible. And it's so interesting when you say you work with the schools and communities outside of the adoptee and their immediate family. Do you find the schools are quite receptive when you speak to them about kind of addressing sensitivities or looking at the way they communicate and work with their adoptee students?
I will say honestly, a lot of schools are very receptive in principle, but not all of the schools are so forthcoming with implementing some of the suggestions in practice. And that can be for a range of reasons. It might be due to resources, it might be due to additional learning that's required. And there are places that, myself or social workers that I will work with will refer schools to go and get specialist training, such as PAC UK. But overall, they tend to be receptive. But sometimes I just think because schools are having to have so many roles and deal with so much, occasionally, there are instances where they're not putting enough of the support that's needed in place. That being said, I have worked with a number of absolutely fantastic schools who either have already done the training themselves, so they're really, they're really well versed and experienced in how to best support adoptees in the classroom and in the school environment, or other instances where they've been receptive to either training that I've conducted, because I work as a consultant as well as a therapist, or they've been receptive to training that I've suggested that they access, or just, workshopping to think about how best they might support the young person in the classroom. But it really depends on the school, and it's something which a lot of parents of adopted children are so considered on the type of school that they choose, and so many parents are real advocates, and I would say even activists, for making sure that their child, but also other children from the adopted community, get the absolute best support, because they know how important that is for the child's ongoing development, but also how important it is for the child's sense of belonging in the school, because so many parents are working so hard, or have worked so hard in the past, to ensure that they've created the belonging for the child within the family as well, that it would be really unfortunate for that to be undone as part of the school process. That said, there are instances where there are some children I've worked with, and a lot of the thing that's keeping some of the challenges that are keeping them in therapy are not to do with their experiences at home. It is to do with their experiences at school, because there's a lack of understanding, or whether that's with the teachers or with other people within the school, or whether that's within their peer groups.
If an adoptee is struggling in school, is it often the peers, or can it also be the teachers who are sort of not, I don't want to say causing those issues, because I think that's the wrong way to put it, but who might be perhaps not behaving in the most helpful way?
I think it depends.
Yeah.
I think depending on the age as well. Very sadly, there's a lot of children who are adopted, and it's the fact that they're adopted is something which they're bullied about in school, and that is then peer led. In many instances, that tends to be the most common way that I see young people affected by experiences with peers, and it's that really immature, at sometimes ignorant, and in other instances malicious. I'm trying not to, attribute malicious motives to some people, but it really does depend on the individual, sadly. But that tends to be worked on really well in the school, and it's the long-term impacts for young people that tends to come into the therapy room. So the long-term impacts of being bullied around their sense of belonging, or around the difference of their family, or some of the challenges that they're having, that tends to be what comes into the room. When the complexities come from the teachers, most of the time, and it's not just the teachers, it might not just be direct teachers, it might be people who are running an assembly, so it's a deputy head teacher, whatever, or it could be someone within the pastoral team. But anyway, when challenges come from those areas, I find it's most often, again, try not to generalize, it's most often due to a misalignment of understanding around what the need of the child is, most of the time, because in most instances, teachers that I've worked with are really trying their best to create the best environment for all young people. And many teachers do go the extra mile, and schools go the extra mile to ensure that they're creating a safe environment for adoptees as well. But there are just sometimes that doesn't quite work out in the way that would best suit the child. And I think that's another thing that I wanted to pick up on is some teachers will say, yeah, no, we're an adoption aware school, etc. And they've had a series of other adoptees in there. But there's this idea that all adoptees present the same, and that's just not the reality. It's like, and yeah, and then they might, a child that I've worked with, and they go into the school, and the teachers are struggling, and they can't really understand their struggle, because they're thinking, well, the last few children, we've done this, and this, and this really supported them. And that's, for me, that's part of the importance of really working with who you are, meeting who you are working with as an individual. There are things that you can do that will support all children, not just adoptees, in thinking about how you support children to manage transition into schools, how you support them to speak up and engage in class or focus, etc. There are many things that you can do that will benefit the whole class, and there are some things that will specifically may benefit some adoptees with particular challenges. But you have to work with who you've got in front of you, basically, not just think, oh, well, I've worked with this number of adoptees and this worked for them. It's not necessarily going to translate.
Absolutely. I mean, it is so sad when you hear of kids getting bullied for being adopted. And I think it just goes to show so many of the resources on adoption, or historically anyway, have been kind of mainly for adoptees or adoptive parents and adoptive families. But then if we don't have these conversations in the mainstream, then parents who are raising non-adopted children might not understand those dynamics. Then when they're sending their kids to school, they might be going with preconceived ideas, or maybe sensationalized ideas they might have seen in movies or on TV. And I think that's why it is so important to have a broader conversation outside of the adoptive community. Just so the more people who understand, the better, really.
The thing that is also really important to think about as well is, and what I was trying to capture is, it's dynamic. So our language is changing, our understanding is changing, the way in which we support people is changing. So it is important that we continue having conversations to think about how we capture some of those changes as well, because what was considered best practice, 30 years ago, in many instances really is not best practice now. So I think we also need to bear that in mind, that it's a change in landscape, like so many other things where we need to be sensitive to the needs of people. The more time progresses and the more we hear from adoptees themselves, or people who've worked with adoptees, or parents of adoptees, or anyone else around the community of those people who've got specific experience or knowledge, the more our language and our understanding can grow.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. I know you've just spoken to us about some of the reasons why you've enjoyed working with adoptees, but up until this point, is there anything else that you've particularly loved about it?
I think it was the playfulness. I know that might sound strange, but with with some adopted children, based on because of some of the life experiences that they've had, which have in some cases been a life of deprivation for some people, or a life of challenge, at least in one way or another. Um, Many of the children that I would work with when I would first meet them, they'll struggle to express their emotional needs, or they might struggle to express what their thoughts and feelings were clearly. But I found that they were really able to do that in play. A lot of the children I was working with, that creativity and playfulness wasn't lost. And for me, I think that's the essence of what we're all trying to get to in how we relate with one another. Not necessarily playfulness, but I think playfulness is a real sign of health. It's a sign that you're able to connect with someone else in a way that's spontaneous, and in a way that's creative, because that's essentially what play is. You're creating stories, or you're creating narratives, or you're creating worlds, and that's a way for connection, which felt really important for children who maybe in some instances couldn't connect otherwise.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting you say that, because it sounds really daft. As much as we know being creative is important, I hadn't even thought how it could relate to a child who might not be able to express themselves in that way in everyday life. And do you think creativity perhaps gives them a sense of escapism in some senses? Or is it more just it opens up a new part of their brain that they can explore and just have fun with?
I think children's play independently can be all of those things plus. It can be somewhere where where children and young people learn new things, escape current reality, try out new experiences through play, and it can be a way that they develop as well. Not just the trying out of something, but they can develop different positions. So not just the individual self I position, but also have experiences of empathy through play, and really experience that through the process of playing, either independently or with another person. Um, but as a therapist, the training school of thought that I was trained in, work with children is always based in play. It's almost the language through which we communicate and make contact with young people.
It's really interesting, because I think when you think of therapy, stereotypically, you think of sitting in front of someone and talking. But then, of course, when it comes to children, you have to manage that completely differently. Again, kind of to dive into it a little bit more, when you say play, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean in terms of maybe sort of drawing, painting, physical play, or could it be an amalgamation of everything?
So I'll try and explain. I can speak generally about therapy, and then I can speak specifically about what I do. So I first trained as a music therapist. I've gone on to do other training since then, but my primary training is as a music therapist. And music therapy in the UK has its, I suppose, its theoretical and historical roots in psychotherapy, in the specific talking form of psychotherapy called psychodynamic psychotherapy. And what that means, trying to be as brief as possible, is we're thinking about various levels of consciousness. So what's presently conscious to you, what might be in the back of you, the subconscious, and then the unconscious. So we're working across all of those levels, but also that therapy is thinking about how your past experiences, or your past life, and your early relationships through life has an impact on how you are today. So what we believe is that one's early life experiences can set the blueprint in some way for what people come to expect in how they relate to others and how others relate to them. And it's not that those things are rigid per se, but it's a blueprint. It's the first sketch that you're given as to how people
Absolutely.
conduct themselves in life. And as a music therapist specifically, when you're working with children, children play, and music is playful, and music has so many aspects and parameters that mirror language, that allow one to express themselves. So the music becomes the mode of connection. So you're playing music together, you are connecting without words. And you can also use words alongside of that, as part of the music therapy specifically. Now, when I'm working with children who, particularly children who are sort of 10 and under, they're at the ages where children play a lot developmentally, and it's important for their for them from a position of child development. What I would be doing is combining the music with play. So I'd have dolls in the room, or have toys in the room. Sometimes I do work with art materials, but I tend to keep it in the music as much as possible, because as with music therapy and other creative therapies, all of the creative therapies being art, music, dance and drama, all of them are their own specialisms, and they all have the potential to open up a form of expression and connection with another person. And it's really important that you know what you're doing and you're fully trained to be able to manage that when you're working with people, particularly who are maybe vulnerable, or people who, might express something in a very vulnerable way through the art maker, and you have to ensure that you're able to support them for that to feel safe and to make sense of what they're expressing in the art. So whilst I don't typically usually invite children to express themselves through art making, there are pens in the room, there's paper in the room, so if they gravitate towards it, I will naturally use it, but I would usually use talking and music. So
it's so beautiful, and it's lovely as well, because you're not saying one size fits all. You're really allowing them to take the reins, I guess, and express themselves exactly the way they want to, whether that's verbally or creatively or physically. I think, yeah, that's such an incredible thing. And I think everyone should go to therapy, personally.
Yeah, I think it's a really important experience for a lot of people
is.
to have, where I think we can often have the understanding or misunderstanding that therapy is something you go to when there's something wrong only. And it's not. It's something that you can go to when there isn't something wrong and you're just trying to have a healthier approach to life.
Absolutely.
Similar to going to the gym, I guess,
Yeah.
for those people who go to the gym or exercise.
But what you were saying just now kind of leads me on to my next question. Of course, as you said, there doesn't have to be something wrong to go to therapy. So when you are working with adoptees and their families, are there particular circumstances that lead them to reach out to you? Or is it sometimes a case of families just wanting to check in? And again, like we say, going to the gym, it is more of a, it's more of a check-in as opposed to something's wrong, we need a fix.
Most often, across the board, when you're working with children, it's usually those who are in a position of authority in the children's lives who make the referral to therapy. It's very rare that the child themselves will make the referral. However, there are some cases where children might say to parents, I would like to go to therapy for whatever reason. And in the area of adoption, it usually tends to be the case that the referrals to any form of therapy, whether it's music or EMDR, which is the other type of therapy that I practice, it's usually the case that there's been a challenge in the child's life, and that's the thing which will initiate a referral to therapy. However, there are some instances, particularly with children who have very complicated life stories or complicated early experiences, or early experiences that are associated with lots of trauma, lots of transition, lots of change, for example. There might then be a preventative or early exploratory piece of therapy work which is commissioned. So quite commonly in those cases, it might not be that a child is demonstrating anything at this time which suggests they need therapy. However, it might be that because of the circumstances surrounding them, it's thought that it would benefit them to do some work at an age-appropriate level to work on life story, or maybe support the relationship with the adopted families that they with their adopted family. So both of those two things are the reasons to be referred in often.
It makes total sense. And when you are working with adoptees, do you find there are any patterns? Are there any patterns that you notice? Of course, everyone's situation is very different, it's unique. But is there anything that you notice quite regularly, or is it very much everyone is completely different?
What sort of patterns do you mean?
Is in behavioural patterns or reasons why they might want to come and talk to you.
Okay, behavioural patterns, no, I think everyone is absolutely an individual, and I think you need to work with people where they are. Did you say referral reason, patterns and the
Yes,
reasons
yeah.
for referral? Yeah, yeah, you do. So
Mm.
a lot of children that I work with might be struggling with transitions. They might be struggling with attachment, so their attachment relationship, and I can give a brief summary of what that is
That would be
if that's
great. Yes,
helpful.
please.
I don't
Absolutely.
know,
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
because I realise I'm maybe discussing concepts that some people might not be aware of, but yeah, they might be struggling with their attachment relationship within the family, or commonly, children that I'm referred maybe need support, both with their emotional literacy. So what that means is it might mean them their understanding of emotions in themselves and in others, and also their ability to express their emotions as well. And quite commonly that it could be the case. I suppose this is a common, I don't want to say a common behaviour, because
Mhm.
really every child is completely different. But
Yeah.
I think there are lots of adopted children that I've worked with who haven't necessarily always had an opportunity to learn the tools of emotional expression. And that might be because there were transitions at particular pivotal points in time of their life. So they haven't had the reciprocal potential for reciprocal dialogue as they've been developing within their families or their foster families or their birth families, or whatever else, whichever other home situation they were in. And in a lot of instances as well, you learn how to express your emotions and regulate yourself from those people around you. So again, it's a communal thing. It's a relational thing that happens with most people, but not everybody. But with a lot of people, I should say, it happens within a family system or within a system of some sort. And what I mean when I say system is the idea of a group.
Mhm.
Whether it's your family group, whether it might be your friendship group, we all take in information as to how we should, or what the common prevailing norms are around how people relate to one another. And that's within the family, but you also learn that from society, so the world outside of your home. So,
And when you're looking to develop someone's emotional literacy, where would you start with that? And again, I know that's saying how long's a piece of string. I'm sure you start at a different point with everyone.
yeah, I think the first thing that I'm often doing is assessing how much young people understand of their own emotions, and how fluently they're able to express their feelings, and how fluently or not they're able to correctly recognize or have sort of on the right line appropriate curiosities about what someone else might be feeling. So what I tend to do is assess that at the start, and then after that, if for example, maybe a clearer way to say this is, there are some I've worked with some young people before who have quite a limited range of emotional expression, i.e., all their emotions are described as happy and
Mhm.
good, or conversely, they're all sad. I'm giving quite a crude example of this. Not everybody would express it in this way, but I might see across the cluster of emotions that the young person is sharing, they're only ever reporting positive things about their relational
Mhm.
experiences, even though their body language or their behavior is dissonant to the words that they're
Mm.
saying. And that might be because they haven't adequately got the emotional understanding of other feelings to be able to express that. But it also might be because it doesn't feel safe, or
Mhm.
it might be there's a whole number of other reasons why a child might choose not to share what are classed as negative emotions or difficult feelings. They might have been punished, or they might have had
Mm.
experiences of those feelings being rejected. So I think what I'd start to do with a young person is try and get a sense of how they communicate emotions, what that looks like, what they're comfortable and safe doing, and then I will use I'll use smiley faces, drawing smiley faces with them. I will at the start, if a child needs to learn, not needs to learn, if a child, well, I think, yeah, if a child I guess, needs to be supported to learn other emotions, I will teach them, what that looks like and what someone might be expressing and all the different possibilities in that. And if a child's very young, sometimes I've done that in play. So there are some young people that I've worked with, and there was a game that we would play, and it was a game that was used to help them identify how their parent was feeling more
Oh, wow.
accurately. And it was using music and just songs, and then also there was a whole ceremony about it, which was quite sweet. but they were, the reason I put this in place is the child was so I'm trying not to use therapy jargon. What we've got, the child was so the child was so aware of their parents. They were so aware of how their parent might be feeling, that was a cause of significant anxiety for them. So they were always worried that their parent might be sad, or that their parent might be upset, and that this was because of them, even though that wasn't true. They were personalizing it, and that made sense in the context of that particular child's life story. But part of the work of them correctly identifying how the parent felt, or being able to do that non-verbal understanding of body language and tone, etc., was to have a wider understanding of emotional expression, and to really be able to work with the parent in the room for them to get a live example of how the parent felt versus how they felt the parent felt. And they became really good at understanding the parents' emotions.
I mean, that's fantastic, and it's so crucial, and it must be so fascinating working with adoptees and their adoptive parents, because I can imagine, there probably are quite a few moments where they might be unsure about how their parent is feeling, especially, I mean, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if they have been adopted at a slightly older age, and I can imagine that does make it a lot harder to kind of come into this new family and then suddenly you have to gauge like a whole new set of people. And I can imagine doing work like this really does help, probably helps them feel much more settled within that family, because they can understand what's going on, how people are feeling, and how they then can respond in return.
Yeah, and I think we all can struggle with how other people are feeling. It's something that every day, you might see someone with a particular expression and you interpret it one way, and they actually feel a complete way that's different to what your interpretation was. But I think what's particularly important when I'm working with children for whom their range of expression is limited, or their capacity to understand the emotional expression of others, I think particularly when you're working with children like that, or who are struggling in that particular way, it's just giving them the resources and the confidence to be able to try it out safely. And I think know that there aren't necessarily going to be negative consequences for them to get it wrong, because there are some children who are adopted and have had quite difficult, harmful early experiences, and getting things wrong can be quite frightening for children, not just adopted children, but anyone. If you've had bad experiences of bad experiences in response to getting something wrong, it can make you a bit more fearful about trying.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. And as you said, it's all about creating a safe space where people or children can feel they can just say how they feel, and then they know it's going to be received with love and understanding.
Yeah.
Because I know that growing up, for me, again, I can only talk from my own experience, but my parents always said, always encouraged me to talk about how I felt, regardless if it was positive, negative, or whether it could be potentially hurtful to them, or whether I had curiosity around like my birth parents and what happened to me, and so on and so forth. And having that safe space, I think, has really set me in good stead. It very much sounds like the work you do is building that for young people and families, and that's just such an incredible thing.
Yeah, I think for the ones who need that, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really nice as well for even the children who have got an incredibly mature emotional understanding. There's many children who are so emotionally aware and really able to express it, but sometimes they need what you've just described, which is permission. Permission to say how they feel. But also, I think another piece that I'm often negotiating in the therapy room, or when I'm working with families outside of the therapy room, is perhaps differences in culture which influence why someone may or may not express an emotion, or maybe there might be a cultural difference in terms of how an emotion how one communicates an emotion in one culture may be different to, how that's communicated in another culture. And there can be a learning process for everybody involved for the people who are trying to understand the child. Usually it's not that the child needs to learn, it's that the people around the child need to understand what that means in their cultural context. And similarly, sometimes it can be a negotiation for children who are adopted to see the differences between cultures, whether they are cultures connected to a particular region of the world. It could be connected to their ethnicities, or it could be connected to the society that they're living in. I think it's really important to consider those things when you're working with anyone.
Of course, I completely agree with you. And in your line of work, do you tend to find you're working with many adoptees who have been adopted into families of a different culture?
I work with a mix of people, but I have worked with quite a high number also of people who maybe were adopted from different countries, or maybe even if they're adopted within the same country, they might be adopted from a different background. So there's a thing called transracial adoption, or transinternational adoption as well. So that's quite common. Not everyone might be able to see me, but I'm Black, and there aren't a lot of Black therapists. There aren't a lot of therapists who are from global majority backgrounds or marginalised, white minoritized backgrounds as well. So it is common sometimes that I'm referred children because they might want specifically to work with someone who's Black. So if there might be a racial identity share that the child has requested, so they might have said, I want to work with someone who's from the same race as me, or I want to work with someone who understands what it is to be Black in the UK, any of those things. Or equally, the social workers who also refer to me might say that I actually think it's important for this child to work with someone who has a shared identity with their therapist, and that may be for a specific reason.
I think it's so important for children to have people who they're looking up to, especially who do look like them. And it's not even about looks sometimes, as you said, it's shared culture and shared understanding of what it's like to exist in this country as the person you are. Like it's so crucial. It really is important. And again, it's wonderful that you're providing that for people. And it's also great that the social workers do recognise that is something important for young adoptees. Growing up in a country where people don't look like you, it can be a little bit daunting, and it must be really odd, really strange for a child to grow up in that kind of environment. So yeah, having people in leadership positions, or people, or just grown-ups as a child, just having grown-ups around you who look like you or have shared experiences with you, is just such an important thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really important to I think it's important to give young people, where possible, as many opportunities to see themselves, and to see their world, their world of their home, of their school, of their community reflected in the world around them. It's not always possible, but I think it is important to have as many opportunities for that to be the case. Social workers, so working in the UK, there are specialist social workers who specialise in working with adopted families and children, and that's not just from the time of what we'd call post-adoption. It's also placement time. So when a child may be placed with a family, they might have a different place in social worker placing, as in when they're placed with family, versus when after they've been legally adopted, after a period of time, their case might be handed over to a post-adoption social worker. And the benefits of that is that the social worker provides a different level of service support based on where the family are at that time, but also the thing I wanted to just really highlight for maybe people who don't understand is that adoption social work, it's not my area, but I've worked with so many fantastic social workers who specialise in adoption. I wanted to say that it is something that people have specialist knowledge in and specialist training in. So the social workers that I have worked with, for the most part, are incredibly skilled, highly trained individuals, and that's important for them to be able to really sensitively hold the needs of the family, but also be able to sensitively and comprehensively think about, you know, how best to support the child as well. And that's not just thinking about the physical safety needs of the child, it's also thinking about the well-being, emotional, psychological, social needs of the child as well. So social workers can be absolutely crucial in getting the right type of support for children and young people. They can really help to guide the family as well sometimes, if that's needed, to say, well, you know, I'm aware of this thing, this intervention. It might be music therapy or creative therapies, or I'm aware of theraplay or family therapy, and they can really give them a bit of a, hopefully give them a specialist, well, not specialist, they can make specialist referrals, but they can give them a very comprehensive insight into the support that's available.
What would be the difference, for example, between a social worker and a therapist?
I am not a social worker, so there are some bits in which there will be, not bits, there will be big gaps in what I can say in terms of what social workers do, but I will try my best. So the role of the social worker, from my perspective, when working with adopted families, I think the key thing to know is that the role changes, or the role can change. So a social worker might be involved in the life of a child who is awaiting you know, who's in a position to be adopted, and they're looking for a family to place them with. Then a social worker, it might be the same social worker that's involved in the child's life whilst if they've been placed, you know, so if they've been matched with a family and they're living with them. So it's really important in that instance, from my perspective. Again, I'm not a social worker. From my perspective, I think one of the really lovely things that a social worker can bring is continuity of knowledge and continuity of relationship, because the social worker a lot of the times will know the child before they've been placed with someone. It's very nice for them to have that continuity between whatever placement they're in before they're placed with their potential, well, their adopted family. And that might be that, you know, the social worker has an understanding of what their foster care, what their foster care is like if they're in foster care, or what the care service that they're living in is like. And then the social worker can bring that knowledge with the child as part of their journey. So it's that understanding of someone that hopefully you feel knows you and you feel safe with. Now, I don't want to overlook the fact that unfortunately there are some children who don't always have, you know, that continuity of care, and there are some instances where I'm sure there are children that don't feel as safe with their social workers as they could and should. And I know that for some people, social workers can be quite frightening, because I remember someone once saying to me that the people that come in when something's going wrong, you know, and I think that, you know, I can understand from the perspective of a child, you know, they might associate the social worker with change or transition. However, when done very sensitively, social workers can be such a resource. And then I think there's another role afterwards, once the child has been gone through the adoption process, and once they've been given a court order and are legally adopted, the social worker can, you know, often I see a lot of social workers gradually tapering away their support, because they're really allowing the parents or parent to take the lead.
Yeah.
You know, and eventually the social worker might close the case to the family, because things they're set to see and the boat seems like it's secure and it's gonna sail well. But you know, the social worker can also be there as someone that is a help and resource to the family when maybe things are tricky or challenging. They might need to get back in contact with the social worker and think about what is going on for their child, what type of support they might need at that time, or what's also going on for the parents as well. So they've got such a complex but incredibly important role. And the way I work, I like to work ideally very closely with social workers, because there are, because in many instances they've got that continuity of knowledge and they have got experiences and specialisms that I don't have. There's such a good resource to work closely with, because they hold knowledge that you just couldn't get on any report or piece of paper that you might read about the child, or they also hold knowledge that really gives you but I don't know. I think I think we can read things about people, but sometimes when you've had a relationship with a person, you can communicate it in a much more enlivened human way. And I think there's something about that which, at their best, social workers are really able to do.
I didn't realise what a pivotal part they played after the placement as well. Because, of course, I knew in the run-up, of course, they're key. But knowing that they actually continue to work with the families afterwards is really brilliant. It's so important. And then also going back to something you mentioned earlier. So in terms of attachment, I can imagine, a lot of adoptees might struggle with attachment or might have certain abandonment issues, or issues is the wrong, I don't want to use the word issues. What's another word for it?
Well, it would be called insecure attachment styles. So just it's not an abandonment issue. It might be that they're led to feel unsafe in attachment relationships. But sorry.
Oh, no, of course. No, thank you so much.
Okay.
So when you do come across a child who has an insecure attachment style, do you then do work with them to help them bond with their adoptive family?
Potentially, but there are some children who might be struggling to attach in places which are outside of the home. So there are children that I've worked with who are very good. They feel safe with their family. They've got a good emotional bond, which is essentially what the attachment is, with their caregiver or their family members, but they struggle perhaps to translate that outside of the home. So they might be struggling in school, and part of that struggle could be that they're struggling with the separation from parents for whatever reason. Every family's situation and how they express themselves differs, but also I think every child comes with their own life story and their own positives and their own challenges in life. But I think that's probably the way that I would work with children and families to support attachment. Is the first step is understanding who the child is, and what type of things they are very good at and the type of things that they really struggle with, and finding ways to work with. I work quite closely with parents, or I work quite closely with social workers who are working with parents, or other agencies who are working with parents. But I'm trying to integrate the understanding and learning of that child with the family that they're in, to try and find ways that they can, the parents can best support their child. But most of the time, the parents are absolutely aware of what they what they need to do to support their child. And I think it's another thing that is really important to acknowledge is the amount of training that parents are given. The adoption process is incredibly rigorous and can be quite challenging for parents, because it's quite a psychologically tiring process, and it's very, I think some people can experience it as quite intrusive in some ways, because there's a lot of questions that are asked. So I think I really want to just acknowledge that adoptive parents are so skilled up. They're so incredible in the information that they've been given. And often adoptive parents have done a lot of work on their self-awareness and making themselves readying themselves to adopt a child. And parents that I've worked with take it so seriously, and it's a huge commitment, and it's a huge change to your life. And it's for many, well, for I don't know anyone that I've met who's not wanted to adopt, but I mean, many parents who adopt, they really want the child that they're adopting, and they have put a lot of time, work, and learning into trying their best to create a safe and nurturing environment for the child that comes into their life. And I think sometimes professionals who maybe work outside of the area of adoption or are new in the field of adoption aren't always aware of how much work parents have done before getting to the stage of adopting a child. So Yeah, so I say all that to say that, I also, in my work, I work so closely with parents because they are with the child all the time. I'm not with the child all the time. And yes, I'm the therapist who is is thinking about what's going on for the child and trying to understand that in the room and outside of the room. But parents know their child,
Mm.
and I'm often reliant on partnership working with parents to get a
Mm.
sense of um, the ripple effects that are occurring outside of the therapy room.
Mm.
So it might be that something's happening in the room and I might need to speak to the parents within a confidential way. So not to say, not to break the confidentiality of the child, but if there's something which um, maybe a behavior change or something which seems to have shifted that I'm noticing, I may need to speak to the parents and say, oh,
Mm.
what's happening outside of the sessions? How are they at school? To see if anything else has changed, or to get a parent's insight into what they think is going on for their child, because that can be so invaluable for me.
Absolutely. And yeah, adoptive parents are, or parents, I should just call them,
Yeah.
are absolutely incredible. I mean, speaking to my parents, and actually recorded the first episode with my mum, and she was talking about
I
all the
heard of
talks and,
it.
oh, and she was talking about all the prep they did and the organisations they spoke to. And even when I was younger, she'd go through exactly all the questions they'd be asked, all the background checks. And again, I spoke to another wonderful woman on a previous episode about her experience with the adoption process in the UK. And again, it's just so rigorous. And people probably have no idea just how much people go through. And it's not like you're pregnant for 9 months and then that's it. It can take years and years. So it really is incredible that people commit that time, effort, emotional energy, financial, everything. It's such a beautiful thing. And it's certainly not something to be, what's the word? Can't think of the word now, but
I think the process is something not to be, undervalued or undermined in any way, because parents really are coming with often a very good, solid understanding of some of the psychological theories, which is really helpful for me sometimes, because I can say certain things and parents sometimes will understand, well, often will understand that. But it's really good for the children that they're adopting, because they understand. A lot of parents are told, there might be times in the journey of your child's life and your journey as a family where it's really not easy and it's very challenging, and that could be there are the challenges that happen for everyone when you're going through different transitional stages through life, and whenever that is. But for some children who have been adopted, their experiences in life can mean that some of the challenges might look different or might be more intense, I guess.
And another thing I'd love to delve into that we were speaking about earlier, life story work. So I know you mentioned that before when we spoke, and I'd love to know a little bit more about that. And first of all, kind of what is it, and how can it be beneficial for adoptees and their families?
Similarly, life story work, it's something which social workers, not just social workers, but it's something which social workers do often do with a child who's they might do that at the start of them being in their care, so the social worker's care on their caseload. I didn't want to say caseload, I prefer to say care. But anyway, so it's something that's done quite early on, and really what the life story book is doing, it's offering the child an opportunity to have in one place, often in the form of a book or a pamphlet, an idea of their personal history. So who am I? Where was I born? What does my family look like? Or what did my first family look like, my birth family? And I've been privileged to see the life story books of some young people, not all of them. There are some young people that I've worked with who have actually brought their life story book to sessions before,
Oh.
which has really felt like a very trusting thing for them to do. But it's something which can change over time, a life story book specifically, and that might be that it changes with new developments in their life. So it might be that you add things to the life story book. It might be that children, adults, whether that's the social workers, whether it's when the children are post the court order of adoption. It might be that they add more information to it, but it's really trying to give a child-friendly and age-appropriate account of what's happened in their life. And as I said, the reason why that can change is because as children get older, it may be appropriate for them to know a bit more information in more detail. So the idea is that the child knows about their life story in a way that's digestible for them. But there might be some bits of information that are written in a child-friendly way. For example, about maybe it's about birth family experiences. It might be about the child's early experiences, particularly if there were traumas or challenges. I think it's very important that in this country, I'm not sure what. Yeah, I'll just stick in this country. I think it's very important for, and well, not just I, also the adoption work that we're aware of in this country. It's important for the children to have access and transparency as much as possible to understand, questions that they may have about themselves and about their birth family.
Definitely.
I was just going to say what life story work might look like in therapy. So usually I wouldn't do life story work with someone unless, so that can be a reason for referral. So for example, some social workers or families might refer a child to therapy because they're struggling with their life story. And it might be that they are struggling to understand it. There are bits of their life story which are particularly triggering for the child. Or it may be that they want to think more about their life story in an age-appropriate way, and that could be a piece of work that we do together. And the difference, I suppose, the purpose of doing it in the therapy as opposed to doing it outside of the therapy. Well, when you do it in the therapy, you're always working with a life story that's already there. So it's not that I would never complete a child's initial life story for them. It's already long been done, but I think that's appropriate for people with all the information to do that. But it may be the case that as a child is aging, that they have more questions. So that can be a common reason for life story work. Might be the child is asking more questions about their birth family and want to know a bit more, and it could be that some of the information that they may have questions about or information that they may want to know could cause emotional upset or emotional disturbance for the child, and therapy is a very helpful place to be able to take that and make sense of it and work through it. So the idea of doing the life story work in conjunction with the therapy is it gives the child a space to make sense of the feelings that come up in relation to that, or it might give the child a place to express feelings or thoughts that they might not feel able to say outside, or they might be worried about saying certain things to their adopted family about their birth family, because they may be concerned about what the impact of that will be. And I think I think it's hard to speak about it generically because it is so individualistic. But I think it's really important for children and adults as well to have an opportunity outside of their family or friendship groups where they can say certain things that they may be concerned about being judged for, or people upsetting someone about, and the idea of upsetting someone can be really complicated if you might be worried about what the consequences of upsetting someone is, and that in the therapy could be the work, how to be able to get to a place of saying things that are important to you and feel secure enough in your place and in your sense of belonging within the family to be able to know that that's hopefully not going to have an impact on a negative impact on your place in the family.
It goes back to what we were saying about creating a safe space, and it sounds like life story work really does help towards that. And again, it's also interesting looking at it as you said, from a therapy point of view, and then also outside of therapy. Because when I did mine, again, it was just with my mum. But then I can imagine, if I didn't have that relationship with her, and if I was kind of worried about asking questions about my birth family that, might not go down well, I might not ask them because I'd be too scared of upsetting her. And I'm very lucky that wasn't the case. But it's great that you do provide that safe space for people to do that if they do need it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, part of a space that can be provided in therapy for children who are adopted or who are placed can be thinking about why they don't want to look at their life story.
That's interesting.
Because that's really common as well. It's like, and it's not that everybody has to look at their life story. That's not the case, but maybe it might be an important communication, or might be something important about the stage that they're in as to why they're not engaging with their life story right now, or they don't want to think about it.
Choked on the words then. Wow.
Oh gosh. Like the same.
But it is interesting because, again, I hadn't considered, of course, people might not want to look back in certain points of their life, and that I can imagine that is quite indicative of where they're at in their life, and perhaps it's not the right time for them to go back. Because I think so many times, as much as talking about things is so important, and going back to the past is crucial, sometimes it's not the right time right now, and it's nice that that's acknowledged. And just because it's there doesn't mean all the time you have to go back and keep looking at the past.
Yeah, and it can be really painful as well. It can be really painful to look back at the past, and whether that's because the past was a time of pain, or there can also be the pain in not having been always with your adoptive parents, who are your parents. That can be really painful for some people to think about that as well.
Of course. And when it comes to doing the life story work, do you find it does help to answer a lot of those unanswered questions? For example, again, in my case, we'd look at the reasons why my birth parents might have had to abandon me, and how they might have felt in that moment. And although we didn't actually know factually, I found it quite beneficial. Well, now looking back, I know I found it beneficial to explore those ideas. And even though we don't have a concrete answer, just to know that it's an open forum to discuss those things was very helpful. But do you find it does help to kind of not answer the unanswered questions, but to sort of fill in the blanks and just open up a discussion around it?
When individuals want to do that work, then yes, I think it can be really unhelpful to force life story work onto a child that really doesn't want to do it at that particular point. So I think as long as the child is at a stage, as a therapist, as long as the child's at a stage where they want to engage with it and they're asking to engage with it, or if they've got, I think I might have said earlier, if you're noticing that there are more questions that they have about their birth family or about their early life, then it might be an indication that they want to know a bit more, or want to understand a bit more about their life story. So I think it can be helpful. I do think, though, it should, for me, I as a therapist would tend to do life story work in conjunction with people around the child as well, because again, it can be very evocative.
Of course. And when it comes to working with adoptees, what's one of the most rewarding things you find? Or interesting, maybe what's one of the most interesting things about working with adoptees? But I suppose working with people generally is so interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say,
so unique. And
yeah, I was going to say it's really hard because everyone's just an individual. I know it might sound like a really strange answer.
It's so true.
But, I'm so grateful to. This might sound like a really cheesy answer, but I am incredibly grateful to the children that I've worked with and the families for their vulnerability. Their vulnerability to share so much of themselves and their lives with someone that at the start was a complete stranger to them. So I don't know if that's one of the best things about working in adoption, but it's one of the things that I'm often struck by. I learn a lot about how to be a better therapist in adoption from working with people who have lived experiences in adoption, and I think, I'm sure in every profession, but and particularly in adoption, you can sometimes learn how you need to do things differently. as a therapist, and really take into consideration that particular individual's life experiences and how that's got them to where they are today. So I think there's something about many children's capacity to want to connect with you, want to play. I find that in some instances when children have experienced such, well, I think some of the children that I work with have been let down by adults many times. And not all of the children, but many of the children that I work with have been let down by adults so many times that I have gratitude for the fact that they are able and willing to open up to another adult in the context of maybe having had experiences with adults who didn't always do their best for them. Whether that was intentionally or not, they haven't always done the best for the child.
And it is incredible they can open up to you and be vulnerable with you and allow you to work with them to build that trust back up again. And I have so much respect for anyone who goes to therapy, and not even just in the context of adoption, just in life. I think it's such an important thing, and I think it should be compulsory in schools from 14, but that's a whole other conversation. But the work you do is it really is incredible, and you must have met so many amazing people from such different walks of life, and as you said, you must have learned so much through it too. And it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And I think that one of the things that I have always learned from the children that I've worked with is they always want to play. They're happy to have fun and play and and learn more about you and the world as well.
Well, that's such a beautiful thing to take away. And I think it's so easy to overcomplicate, whether that's as a parent or anyone in a role of responsibility with the child. It's easy to overcomplicate it and think, what they need, I need to do this perfectly, I need to do this, I need to do that. But I guess ultimately every child just wants to feel safe and to be able to have fun and just be a child. And like you said, just play. And it really, I guess, it doesn't boil down to that, but playing and having that space to be creative and express themselves is such an amazing thing. And if anyone can create an environment for a child to be able to do that, then you're kind of onto a winner, really.
Yeah, I think they also really want to be seen and understood as well. They want to be seen as, who they are, with all of the complexities of that. And I think that's a reminder for what we all as people want. It's to be seen and to connect with others. So yeah, I'm grateful for that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and having this conversation. There's just, so much to take away, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.